Thank you, Gustavo. In this paper, I deal with a specific type of disability, namely mental disabilities. Last October, the World Health Organization celebrated the World Mental Health Day with the aim of increasing the perception of the urgency of combating the stigma still persisting on the issue. The term mental health is not limited, as we know, to the mere absence of mental pathology or existential distress, but refers to the state of inner balance that enables a person to use all the emotional, cognitive, social, and physical resources available to him or her. Today, medicine clarifies how there is no separation between body and mind. Therefore, mental health does not end with psychological well-being alone, but involves a more global dimension of the person. Mental suffering has always been accompanied by fear and shame. And while it is true that today mental pathology is viewed differently than in the past, it is equally true that social prejudice and the stigma of incurability are still so deeply rooted. People with mental disorders are often viewed as dangerous to society, and the mistrust of doctors who deal with these conditions is one of the biggest barriers to accessing treatment. Talking about mental health and realizing that the mental dimension deserves at least equal, if not greater attention than that given to the physical component in order to experience complete well-being is something that can and should be done. And if the terms of the analyzers of the times, the so-called signia temporum, vulnerability fits right into their ranks. Vulnerability, to be distinguished from fragility, is a common connotation of the human condition and has a complex and paradoxical character. Complexity consists in its being universal and individual at the same time. Paradoxically, on the other hand, consists in the fact that vulnerability is relational and contextual. We are vulnerable in a given precise context. One relevant point, in my opinion, deserves some consideration right from the beginning. When it comes to people with mental disabilities, that is a point that Marta this morning made, Marta Cartabia, a legal-only reading of rights risks being reductive if the expectations, feelings, and desires of such people are not also taken into consideration. After a long season of policies marked by the protection of people with mental disabilities, we are now at a turning point where a real paradigm shift is required if the goal pursued is that of inclusion. The complex system of responses to the social needs of which the mentally ill people, think for example, the so-called neurodivergent people are bearers, must be characterized by marked flexibility and personalization, so as to unhinge standard service models now obsolete. Following alarming reports on the psychological, emotional, and economic burden of disabilities on families, communities, and healthcare system, WHO has long placed mental health among its priorities, with greater intensity as a result of the effects produced by the COVID-19 pandemic. Mental illness, which has always been last in the economic investment of healthcare system in all Western countries, demands that it no longer be marginal in national investment programs. there is an absolute need to strengthen integrated public policy planning in the knowledge that even if mental illness are not numerically the most prevalent, they certainly entail a very high care burden on sick people, and also on the families and communities that care for them. Take the case, for instance, of the European Union. The European Union sets 10% of the national health fund as the minimum level of spending that each country of the Union should devote to mental health. Well, in Italy, it barely reaches 3%, and in no European country is that target met, the target of 10%. And recall that care is about social inclusion, rehabilitation, and prevention, not simply about a chronicizing medicalization of mental disorder. A recent survey by the Harvard Center for Population and Development Studies indicates that depression today is the fourth leading cause of disability-adjusted life years lost, or better to say, years adjusted for disability lost. Essentially, a quarter of the total days lost are attributable to mental and behavioral disorders. By next year, depression will be the second only to ischemic heart disease as a cause of the global burden of disease. Yet, despite of all this, mental health does not appear on international health agenda. Although the burden of disease resulting from psychiatric and behavioral disorders is enormous, it is severely underestimated by conventional public health statistics because they aim to focus on mortality and not also morbidity or dysfunction. Deaths are traditionally attributed to their immediate causes rather than to the underlying behaviors or disease conditions that lead to the ultimate crisis. Just to give an example, even when a suicide is due to depression or schizophrenia, it is classified simply as suicide. Having said so, what should be done? Development policies must protect and promote mental health. This includes assisting governments in formulating national mental health programs, improving the representation and protection of basic human rights for patients with mental disorders, taking into account the views of users and their families when making decisions about mental health, keeping in mind that the number of people with major mental disorders will increase in the coming decade. And this is for two main reasons. The first is that the number of people living in the age at risk for this illness is increasing. The second reason is that the rates of depressions have risen in recent decades and will continue to rise as a result of the pattern of economic growth that has been emerging as a result of many different factors. Well, let me remind you the book by Case and Deaton, Angus Deaton, and whose title is revealing. The title of that book is Death of Despair. And it's really very sad to read those pages where Deaton and his wife and Case declare that depression is generated by the working of a particular model of society. Today, we are able to document that the endemic increase in social inequality, the scarcity of relational goods, and the cultural spread of the competitive principle to the detriment of the cooperative principle are among the major causal factors in the spread of mental disabilities. A novelty in a recent technological development should be noticed. Robots companions, family robots, personal assistants, care robots, socially assistive robots are taking the place of humans in caring for the mentally disabled and other categories of disabled people. Now, while the benefits of these caring machines, as somebody has called them, must be recognized, some perverse effects, such as the risk of increasing the isolation of those who are already alone, cannot be overlooked. Indeed, a relational service model, in my opinion, is fundamentally different from a care service model. Let me just a couple of minutes devote some attention on the disability employment gap, which was mentioned already this morning. The most recent data, September last year, on the disability employment gap show that persons with disabilities are persistently disadvantaged in the labor market compared with persons without a disability. Between 2014 and 2022, for instance, in the European 27 countries, this gap ranged from 22 to 21 percentage points. These figures refers to disabled people in general, but what can be said for the mentally disabled? Some interesting novelties are emerging on this specific front. In February 2022, Sam Altman invested significant sums in Mentra, a startup created by 3 autistic people with the aim of using artificial intelligence to help large information technology companies hire workers with dyslexia, attention deficit, hyperactivity disorders, Asperger syndrome, and the like. Altman, the father of ChatGPT, knows well both the potential of artificial intelligence and the troubling lack of talent needed to work with it. Now, Manpower, which is a recent platform, informs us that the world today lacks 78% for the tech talent that artificial intelligence needs. This piece of information triggered the question, why look for this personnel among those who are neurodivergent? The social enterprise Oticon, that is its name, answers that people with neurodiversity have characteristics such as attention to detail, high concentration even on repetitive tasks, precision in problem solving, etc., that prove very useful for information technology projects. Oticon, founded in Berlin in the year 2011, now operates in 14 countries, selling neuro-inclusion services to large companies. The more than 400 neurodivergent workers have above average logical intelligence that enables them to develop information technology projects more efficiently than neurally normal people. That is something remarkable. They are also incapable of lying, for instance, a quality that makes them well suited to work on sensitive data in sensitive areas such as cyber security. In March 2 years ago, 2022, the world's largest professional platform, LinkedIn, listed dyslexic thinking with distinctive qualities. Credit for this breakthrough that shatters many stereotypes about people with diversity goes to Kate Griggs, the founder of non-profit organization which is called Made by Dyslexia. In her view, dyslexics are born explorers and thus well suited to stimulate artificial intelligence to grasp the crux of a question and respond with the most useful information. For example, in pattern recognitions, neurodivergent people have above average ability. And in March 2022, the report, which is called Artificial Intelligence and the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, was presented to the United Nations Human Rights Council. The special rapporteur, Gerard Quinn, denounced the fact that people with disability are at risk of being rejected for a particular job without even considering their merits or without considering that with a simple aid they would be able to do the required work. Hence the suggestion to hire artificial intelligence developers who have experienced or are experiencing disability. And this is in accordance with the motto of the United Nations, which says, nothing about us without us. People with diversity should not simply be listened to in order to take into account their perspectives. They must also be involved in the solution of their problems. And this is so in order not to transfer onto machines the implicit prejudice related to emotions, prior experience, and external conditions. Enthusiasm for the possibility that artificial intelligence opens wide and for the role as protagonist and not just beneficiary that people with diversity can play is spreading, especially among those working in neuromuscular and neurodegenerative disease. People are beginning to talk about disability as an empowering element of technology research. In short, a major shift is taking place. Diversity is proving to be a key competency in the current technology transition. Now, final point has to do with the model of welfare system. The social transformation of the past 3 decades intersects with the profound crisis of the welfare model that still prevails today. What emerges from the res nove of the present era is the need for a comprehensive readjustment of welfare systems capable of overcoming outdated protection schemes and at the same time being financially sustainable. The new proposals of social investment call for abandoning a centralized model of public intervention, the so-called welfare state, where state means government, in order to experiment with different forms of welfare systems, in which the univocal relationship between the public system and the welfare state is overcome. In addition to the public, private entities and third sector organizations are also called upon to play a relevant role at the allocative and redistributive level in homage to the principle of subsidiarity. The initial response to the crisis of the welfare state in the 90s was a neoliberal model known as the welfare mix, in which public agencies retain the monopoly of commissioning, but give up, in whole or in part, the direct provisions of services in favor of their provision by private producers. In the last 15 years, however, dissatisfaction with the results generated by the welfare mixer has led towards the construction of a plural welfare model known as community welfare, in which civil society actors are also given the power to participate in the process of planning intervention and not only in the process of designing them. In other words, there is not only a problem of co-projecting, but also co-planning. From the point of view of the services offered, community welfare differs both from welfare state and welfare mix, because unlike the former, it does not offer standardized services, and unlike the latter, it does not offer services that tend to favor the privatization of the service, resulting in fragmentation and isolation. I have to conclude. And it is interesting to notice that in this regard, there are many challenges that can be taken. One thing is clear. For the many and varied proposals to be taken seriously and implemented, there must be an international movement that prioritizes mental health. There is no doubt that a worldwide consensus, such as that organized on democratization, will determine substantial pressure to get all societies to rethink priorities and practice. It is essential that similar international attention be given to mental health issues by international agencies such as the United Nations, the World Bank, the World Health Organization, and regional organizations such as ASEAN, the Organization of African Unity, and the Organization of American States. It is essential, in short, to raise the international level of awareness that will condition the priorities that policymakers and those who develop them in countries around the world assigned to the disabled people. And in this regard, it would be proper to ask somewhere, in some way, to the, as you know, on June 12th, 2022, the International Labour Office, which is seated in Geneva, approved a resolution concerning decent work and the social and solidarity economy. That is the title of the resolution. Now, if you read the content, in particular, of the conclusion, no mention is given to disability. And I found that, since that is only 2 years ago, rather a bit outrageous, because we read all human beings, irrespective of race, creed, or sex, have the right to pursue, etc., etc. But why not adding disability? Because otherwise the differentiation will not be complete. To conclude, I think that the social inclusion can take the place only on the grounds of the formal recognition of equal opportunities to participate in the strategic, decisional, and operative moments that make a social aggregate an active civil society, polyarchic and solidarist. It should never be forgotten that the principle of inclusion does not originate in satisfying debts by exchange or distribution. Distribution operates within an already given social inclusion. One does not become a member of the society by the fact of being given something. That is ultimately the purpose of a new approach towards the inclusion of disabled people. Thank you.